Hi, everybody. Megan Thompson here. And as we wait for a couple people to get on live, I just wanted to reiterate for those of you who are new to this group who I am. So, I am a licensed clinical professional counselor and registered play therapist in Maryland and Virginia. And I've been working in the mental health field since high school. Some of you don't know that, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. But one of the things I think is super important for people who are here is, and again, those of you who are here live, say hi, let me know you're here, hashtag replay if you haven't caught it. I'm here for you today to share something very personal and near and dear to my heart, while also hopefully focusing on leading you as parents of sensitive children. And I did not, I don't really have much of a script to go by today. So we'll talk about that in a minute. What I hear a lot from many parents in terms of those who reach out to me for support, and we work with highly sensitive kids and their parents in my private practice in Maryland, is for many of you the big question is it really that bad? When we talk about how frequent the meltdowns are happening or the outbursts or the major emotional expression, however that happens for your kid, whether it be running away up to their room and hiding under their bed, whether it be hitting and exploding physically, whether that be a meltdown where they're on the floor and crying and or standing up and crying, stomping around. If your child is expressing intense emotion at the point where they're emotionally out of control, to the point where you have not been able to find a way to teach them how to stop that pattern, then that's a clear indicator to you that your child is having what we call meltdown behavior. Whether or not it looks like a toddler meltdown or not, it's important for you to know that, over all of the videos that I've created here for this community, it is one and the same. Whether your child is emotionally frozen or emotionally explosive, they are not in their emotional bodies and their emotional present moment at that time, and that's a clear problem for your child. And so when we think about what that is and what parents need to observe for highly sensitive kids and why we talk about this, a lot of parents will ask me, I had meltdowns as a kid. I don't really remember how often they were. And so what's normal? Or a family I spoke to earlier this week said, I've raised children, and this person was on their second marriage or relationship, and so they've been through having children before, and maybe you guys have multiple kids, and you've seen your oldest children grow out of meltdowns, and the perspective is different when you're parenting a highly sensitive child. And so I think it's really important to get very clear on what that's about and why that's so crucial for you parenting a young child or an elementary school age child or a preteen or a teenager. Anybody who's in this group is parenting a sensitive child. And so once you're clear on the fact that your child fits the personality trait, then the next question is your child expressing emotion to the point where they are out of control on a regular, frequent, and intense basis? So what does regular mean? Multiple times a week, multiple times a day, especially. Frequent in the sense that they may be happening. It's not necessarily cyclical, like only during the month of May. That's a bad month. But if your kid is experiencing cycles of intense emotion every other month, every 6 weeks, then that's still a major problem for your child's emotional development. So it's important to be clear on that for you. Even if it feels like it comes and goes in waves, that's an indicator to you that your child's emotional stability is not actually stable. So when we think about why and how I know that, we'll talk about that in a minute and why this topic is so important for me and near dear to my heart. I really wanted to talk about the personal experience that I'm having right now. A lot of parents will talk to me and they'll say, won't my kid just grow out of these meltdowns? Won't my kid just grow out of this behavior? Won't they just eventually stop hitting? won't they just eventually stop freaking out? Won't we just eventually figure it out? Hey, Carissa. And my response to you is most likely not. And here's why. I have to back it up with two things. One, my personal experience, but number two, my professional experience. And those are twofold for a reason. It's the reason why I'm here on this earth. It's the reason why I have this group. It's the reason why I have my practice. It's the reason why I parent the way I parent. It's the reason why I'm a wife the way I am a wife, to the best of my ability, more often than not. It's the reason why I'm a daughter the way that I am, and a sister the way that I am. Because the way that my family grew up, with a highly sensitive child in our house, did not result in effective emotional management for the entire family. And while my sister eventually grew out of her, how should I say it, meltdown type behavior to the point where she stopped crying, she has not grown out of the emotional escaping and emotional volatility. And she's in her 30s now. And so there's that. The next thing that I think is so important is that my brother and I have worked very, very, very hard at figuring out how to manage frustration, anxiety, and fear and emotional health. And we invested in ourselves and to do so. And that took years for us to correct the ineffective patterns that we learned because just by nature of the beast, being raised in the 80s, our parents just happened to not understand that writing lines doesn't work for teaching behavior, that having lectures and going on and on about why we shouldn't do what we should do and getting yelled at times doesn't teach emotional health. Doesn't teach effective behavior. And so for you as a parent, if you're using timeouts, if you're using spankings, if you're yelling at your kids on a regular basis, if you are having conversations over and over and over again when your child is struggling and you're trying to change ineffective behavior, and I like to use that word for in purpose, because all behavior for children is sending us a message that we need to change how we teach in order for them to get their needs met. So I never say wrong behavior, bad behavior, any of that, because your child's behavior is a direct product to how you are leading them and changing their emotions and how they are choosing to express their emotions. So it's a two-way street, guys. Absolutely. And this is one of the things I work with specifically with my coaching clients, is that your child is responsible for her own emotions. You are responsible as a parent to teach your child how to manage those emotions and therefore affect the behavior. So and that's a personally developed skill, because for a long time in my early adulthood, I would blame my circumstances for my emotions. Things happened to me and therefore I felt shitty. And that was just basically how I experienced the world. And and so let me back up in terms of why this is so important for you as a parent. When you're parenting a child who feels big feelings and is intensely emotionally expressive, both positively and negatively, it is super, super important for you to teach early in their childhood how to become in emotional control of that intense emotional experience. And this goes, there's several fold. I was trying to count. First and foremost, just to back up a little bit, guys, I've been a licensed clinical professional counselor I graduated in 2009 and got my license when, 2 years after that. Was a resident in Virginia before that. And but in my first position in the mental health world was actually in high school. My internship in high school was at a residential treatment facility for children. So I was old enough to work on the boys unit, working with young children. I was shadowing. I was an intern. But I was shadowing, working on the boys unit with, hey, Jody, nice to see you. I'm not going to read that whole thing, and I love you very much, so I'm sure it's full of heart. The importance of that work, the work of helping children manage their emotions, was ingrained to me at a very young age because I knew I wanted to help people, and I started that. I started that in high school. I started that work, and I witnessed firsthand what emotional neglect does to children. And some of these children were in homes where the parents were either drug addicted or engaged in another criminal activity, or they physically abused their kids, and their children's behavior were therefore so unsafe that they had to be removed from the home. So significant trauma in the household. And it's also true that physical neglect in terms of, maintaining roof, food, shelter, and a roof over the head, and water, right, it is also significantly damaging to a child's psyche. And with that said, emotional neglect goes hand in hand with that, because if your body's not cared for as a child, then your emotions are not cared for as a child. Because if someone does not prioritize you enough, and again, no judgment to the families who are struggling with that, if your parent does not prioritize that enough for you at that point of your young emotional development, then you cannot care for anybody else but yourself. And as a result, you don't feel safe, and as a result, you explode emotionally, and you can demonstrate complete disregard for anybody else because you're in a survival mode. Empathy is a learned behavior, guys. It's a learned behavior. So if you're not, and so when we think about that and think about what I know about working directly and working in the living space directly with children who have experienced significant trauma, and then my next position in my internship in college was at a juvenile detention center outside of Philly. And so these the young ladies that I worked with and supported were, they had seen horrific things and spoke about it quite nonchalantly. And that's another witnessing of emotional disconnect, just inability based on significant trauma to put yourself in the position of feeling feelings. All right. So, then my first position in my internship in grad school, so, college and high school internship in mental health, college internship in mental health, and then grad school internship in mental health was, as I mentioned before, working with families of a low socioeconomic status. Like most of the time, English was a second language, and where I was working was outside of DC in Northern Virginia. And so we would see families from El Salvador, Guatemala, et cetera. And so the majority of those families had experienced significantly violent life. So why is this important to you? Because the children who experience that high level of trauma exhibit the same behaviors that your highly sensitive child exhibit. And this is super, super important. We'll talk about that in a minute. Because once I learned of the highly sensitive personality trait later on in my career, I would say, I had my internship, that was for a year, that was 08 to 09. And then 09 was my first position, same area. So very similar work I was doing. And I want to say 2 or 3 years into it, I learned about how some people are born sensitive, and they're more sensitive than the rest of the population. And with that said, those people who are more sensitive than the rest of the population have a much higher risk of developing suicidal thoughts, actions, and behaviors, as well as homicidal actions, thoughts, and behaviors, as well as self-harmful thoughts, actions, and behaviors. I know this is really hard to talk about, especially during the time of coronavirus, and it's also true that it is very, very important to talk about during the time of coronavirus because it's a community-wide, worldwide trauma we're experiencing right now, and you're raising a child who is more sensitive than 80% of the population. So it's very, very, very important that you pay attention to what your child is emotionally experiencing and how your child is emotionally experiencing right now during this traumatic event. And I'm trying to, to stay focused on that because what I've noticed over the years in my career is that once I started to learn about the highly sensitive personality trait and the research related to that, there were two parallel research paths going on at the same time. One was Laine, who many of you are familiar with. She coined the term highly sensitive personality and sensory processing sensitivity, which is what it's called in the research. And she went on to research adults. The majority of her research stemmed from adults. She treated adults as a psychologist, and worked in therapy with adults. Okay, so she has a fair amount of anecdotal research and anecdotal experience, as well as raising her own sons who are, I'd have to go back and check the book if both of them are highly sensitive or if it's just one of them. And she's also highly sensitive, and so is her husband. So this research obviously is near and dear to her heart. And it's also true that she has the clinical background to understand and to work with people who, upon aging to adulthood, sought out support and benefited from said support. So that's her, her perspective, and it sparked the research for many professionals and the work that we see on highly sensitive people. And then parallelly, another researcher started her work in the 60s. Her name is Marsha Linehan, and she's the developer of dialectical behavior therapy, another thing that I got trained in, a type of therapy that I was trained in early in my career. It's how I first learned of the personality trait. It was just not called that in Linehan's research. So when I first was trained on how to help chronically suicidal sensitive teenagers and chronically self-harming sensitive teenagers, I learned from Linehan's teachings and studied her work and became intensively trained in her model of treatment. And she herself is a highly sensitive person who developed borderline personality disorder. So she actually was hospitalized for chronic suicidality, chronic suicidal actions and thoughts, and self-harm. And she is very, very smart, bright woman. And she went to school after that, after she healed, and just designed the only treatment that is found to be most successful with the chronically suicidal, highly sensitive people. Okay, and it's also important to know that most chronically suicidal people are highly sensitive. So those two things are clear in the research. So for you as a parent who are experiencing daily meltdowns for your young child, it's important to know that chronically suicidal people don't just, the drop of a hat, pick that pattern up in adolescence. That pattern starts much earlier in childhood. And when I discovered that, once I was trained in Linehan's work, I started drawing some patterns to my sister, and then learned about Elaine Aron's work. A huge light bulb went off, and I became the Shannon Whisperer, my sister's name, in the household, and it was just like a complete 180 in terms of how I was able to relate to my sister and support her emotionally, and then also how I was able to help the parents and the children that I was working with in knowing what was important to learn in parenting. And when I think about that and my own family's experience, as I reflect over almost it's definitely more than a decade's worth of experience at this point. One thing that I'm constantly reminded of, or is asked of me, is the question, is it really that bad? Does it really need to be that bad? Won't we just grow out of it? And my answer is no. And your kid's not going to grow out of it because it's not a innate skill that highly sensitive children develop. It is a learned skill to manage emotions and to not escape them, and to develop emotional control. Because if you think about it, and I teach this with my clients, if your emotions are like Pigpen's dust bubble behind your, you think about him from Charlie Brown, it's like this, big dust bowl, right? If that's what your emotional experience is, that's the meltdown process, that's the emotional process, that's the thought process running through your kid's mind, then how do you contain that and like sift through it? You need a skill. You need multiple skills. You need to live life skillfully. And before you get there, you need an environment that's conducive to developing those skills. Because when we think about children who experience intense emotions, there are 3 things that impact their ability to develop those skills. Number 1 is their biology. Okay, so children who are sensitive have a biological dispensation, if I'm using the right word, toward emotional discontrol. Okay, so biology is already stacked against your kid. Socially is the other part of that, and the validating environment or invalidating environment is what impacts your child's ability to manage their emotions, and then also their capacity to feel capable of managing their emotions and to see outside, like to look outside themselves to see that they're capable of managing what other people have. And for highly sensitive kids, it is very, very hard for them to perceive themselves as like other people when they chronically feel invalidated by the majority of the population. And what I mean by that is if 80% of the population doesn't understand your child because they are the 20%, then they won't feel the same as other people who are capable of doing that, who are capable of managing their emotions. And so in a logical, highly sensitive, black and white type of semi-rigid way, or rigid way, as many of you parent highly sensitive kids, you can see it's like, your child gets really stuck in those thought processes. Well, if this is happening, then it must be because of that. And you're like, not really. And so it can feel like you're banging your head against the wall when you're trying to shift your kid's perspective. That is the other piece that's stacked against them is your child is not comparing themselves to other people emotionally. They compare themselves to other people performance-wise, which is why you get the perfectionism. But they're not comparing themselves in terms of capability wise from an I can handle it way. They're comparing themselves from a place of like, why haven't I figured it out by now way. And that's perpetuated by shame. And so for you as a parent, if you are not clear on what helps your child manage emotions or it's difficult for you to think about emotions or to talk about them or to teach or especially to play about them, then your child is living in an invalidating environment because they need that validation from you first and foremost from a parent. And the research is hands down 6 ways to Sunday, as well as my emotional and personal experience. Raising a daughter who fits somewhere on that line of being sensitive. She'll be 4 in July, and being a sister of a highly sensitive child, and and then obviously working in the field for 10 years after my master's degree. But what's that? Before that, 6 years, 7 years of school before that. So around now 18 years this year, guys, of just witnessing emotional discontrol in children. And then, I'm 34, so my sister's 2 years younger than me. So that's, once I can remember, 2 years. So maybe since I was 32, So for the last 30 years, I've witnessed emotional discontrol in a sensitive person and what can or cannot work. Okay, and I know that my sample size of 1 in my family may ask you, oh, okay, that's not like my family. That my family is a little different. But I want you to listen up to this as well. You know, personally, my family has experienced some pretty significant losses over the years, and not my immediate family, thankfully, but in my extended family. One of which just happened yesterday. My cousin, who was 3 months younger than me, took his own life, and it's the second suicide that my family has experienced. And in my extended family on my mom's side. And so with that said, both mental health and drug abuse and addiction is something that my family has personal experience with, my extended family. And so while we see that I've witnessed it, that I've worked with it, and that I've observed it at such a young age, and I've lived it, I really want to help you understand and notice that this is not going to get better if you're not taking action, if you're not taking pointed action, and if you're not changing the dynamic now. And I'm just done sugarcoating this shit, guys. I mean, I've already lost 2 members of my family, 3 members, if you count my aunt who passed away from overdose, to emotional avoidance. So sorry, guys, like, done. If you want to hear some sugar plum fairy stuff, go to somebody else's group. You can fish or cut bait at this point, because what you're going to get here is clinically research-driven, emotionally and personally focused truth. Done hiding from protecting my loved ones, and at the sake of not helping families. Now, the majority of my coaching clients and some of my therapy clients are aware of my personal experiences with this. And, you know, you can put 2 and 2 together. My cousin wrote a book about his mom's addiction and what that experience, a graphic novel, and it won an Audie, whatever that is, Audible, like the Oscar version of an Audible. So it's not like a secret. And it's also true that in the therapy world, we're taught to use our information, our personal histories, sparingly, and to think very carefully, because that might be used against us, or that might not serve our clients because they need to come to their own conclusions about their own personal lives. And I think that shit is just keeping you guys treading water. So I'm done with that. Love you too, Jody. And what that means is that some of you who are going to be new to this group, and some of you who will be new to this group, you know, months from now, are going to catch this, and you're going to be like, wait a minute, I thought I was just here to like read, like I would read from a book. And so you're going to hear, you know, continued clinical information. I'm never going to stop learning what works, and I'm never going to stop doing exactly what works with my clients. And I'm also not going to inhibit my personal experiences from impacting in a positive way how I speak to this community and how I teach what needs to be said. So when we think about what drives people to end their lives at all ages, one of the things that's so important is the concept of believing that life would be better off without them in it, that family members would be better off without them in it, and that they are doing their families a service to leave the earth in this lifetime. And that level of feeling like a burden starts in childhood. I didn't necessarily come prepared to say that, but it's true. It starts in childhood. And so if your child is experiencing or saying things like, I hate you, or you hate me, or I'm better off without the family, or I should just run away, Like that experience of feeling like a burden to the family is a childhood experience that perpetuates through adulthood, which then leads to adult suicide. But if they make it, when we think about working with the teens that we treat in my private practice, they feel the same thing. They say things like, "What's the point? It doesn't matter anymore." That apathy for life. Once they get a little bit of hope to think about ending that apathy, it leads to suicide if you don't give them hope that their skills are actually what's leading to being happy. And so the importance parents need to place upon statements like of shame and statements of feeling like a burden for your child is, if I could put it on a Richter scale, it's off the charts, guys. It's off the charts. Because, obviously with the news I received last night, this morning, it hit me because I had to talk to I spoke with my family more so than I did last night. And so I've been crying on and off this day, and my daughter watched me, and she observed me managing my emotions and talking about them and communicating them and checking in with me, but not from a place of feeling like she had to make me feel better, but from a place of recognizing that emotions are okay. And many of you, I've spoken to many of you, especially those who are clients of mine, you've experienced this too. You've either witnessed it in your extended family, or you have siblings who have BPD, or you have, who have gone down the path of drug or alcohol abuse. And so I know, and I feel in your heart and in my heart, that you don't want that for your family. And so part of not wanting to address this as a child for your child, or not wanting to take, direct action on it, or not wanting to bet on yourself to turn it around right now, which is what an investment in changing your child's life is all about, whether you invest with me or not, is neither here nor there. You have to take action. And part of that is self-preservation. I get that. I get that, because biologically, from birth, when we have our kids, whether they're you adopted them or you biologically gave birth, what have you, when you bring your kids into your world, in your home, biologically you are compelled to keep them alive. And so thinking that they may or may not eventually die is in direct conflict of that. And so it's really, really hard to look at it and to take it for what it's worth and to believe it. And quality of life is something that you need to consider when you're concerned with your kids and managing them and parenting them, because it's important to get clear for your family on what kind of life you want your family to live. Do you want to live teetering on that edge? Do you want to live without this having to be a problem? And when I think about the families who have tried to address that in different ways, and they've worked with professionals who say, basically, to narrow it down, like, just keep loving your kid. And I don't, if I could have $1 for every time a parent coach of parents of highly sensitive kids, I say that in air quotes because I don't think that they're actually qualified to do their job. They just happen to get a lot of highly sensitive kids on their caseload, learn about the trait, and think they can understand it. And so when they give advice, it's like, basically, this too shall pass. That's basically what parents, when they come to me, they say, like, we were just basically told to love our kid and envelop them with love enough. And I see this with other coaches who have an online presence too. They say the same stuff. If we just love our child enough, witness their emotion, be there and validate, see it. I hear you. You can melt down in front of me. Now, guys, I've been on my own personal and journey, so I'm not trying to like get all hippy dippy trippy with you or knock the hippy dippy trippy stuff. But the love that you have to send to your child in the middle of a meltdown is not what stops the meltdown cycle. That is a reactive behavior that is meant for you to show your child that you're not judging them in the moment. But that love, you cannot love your child out of emotional discontrol. Your love has to be bolder than that. You have to take action in changing how you relate to your child and in thinking that time will solve this problem. It doesn't solve this problem. I've had other therapists say to me, like, well, once we teach parents how to just observe their emotions and not make it wrong, the meltdowns get less. Like they see like maybe one a day instead of 4 or 5. And most therapists feel like that's a success story. And so, I've got this dichotomy of being both a therapist with a local private practice, and then also, it's not really a dichotomy, it's just the fact that I need to help parents across the nation, and I'm not allowed to be a kid therapist across the nation without getting licensed in every single freaking state. So I do it in 2 different ways because I have to. Where was it going with this? If you're working with a professional or if you've heard this before, that love and time will help your child change their emotional experiencing, it's not going to do that, because what it actually does is it allows you to develop a pattern of feeling resentful because you're enabling your kids' intense emotions, because you, at that current moment, you hit a wall to the point where you start to feel like your love has a limit. All right? So when we think about the concept of unconditional love, I'm just going to take my cup here. As a parent, you bring your baby into the world, or your world in your home. You bring your child home, and you think, my love is insurmountable for this beautiful, beautiful child. And you can do no wrong in my eyes. I will help you. I will love you. I will snuggle you. I will change your diapers. I will feed you. I will help you fall asleep no matter how hard that is. And I will be here when you cry because I am here for you when you cry. And you hold them in your arms and you make them feel better. And that has to change in terms of how you help your child own their emotion so that they can feel in control of it. Because what we see most professionals in this field do is say, and I'll just try and go back to my metaphor here of Pigpen's ball of dust. Okay, we talked about this earlier today. Pigpen's dust ball. Okay, this morphed explosion of emotion is what your child is, especially during the meltdown process. All right, I'm trying to give you a visual. I'm such a visual teacher. Being a play therapist, I'm used to having my wealth of toys available, and my kids. Part of one of our play areas is over here, but I'm not really seeing anything that looks. Maybe I can get. Give me a minute, because I'm feeling inspired. You can still hear me, right? So, what do we got? All right, well, I'm going to go with the circle. Just grab some stuff here. So, your kid's emotional experience, right, is this pigpen mess. Think of it like an amoeba. Like it's not solid and contained, okay? So this is happening. Your child's big emotion is just like that. And when your child's an infant, and even, 1.5, closer to 2, they need you to envelop them in love, to feel like you contain their pigpen emotional mess. Right here, I got you. You can match my heart. You can match my calm. I've got you. And that gives them the sense that they're capable of managing their emotions. But at 2, your child starts to recognize that they are separate from you. That's when no happens. Wait a minute. You don't read my mind? Wait a minute. I'm different from you? Wait a minute. I have power and control? Terrible twos, right? So what happens? Your child's pigpen mess now becomes their responsibility to manage. And they're a toddler. So they're like, F that. Help me figure this out, Mom. Dad, right? And so when you say, I've got you, but in that moment, they won't let you pick them up because they're a toddler and they're like, wait a minute, I'm separate from you. You are sending them mixed messages. So from 2 on, if I've got you, I'm here, you can melt down and I will be here, I will always love you, is your only go-to strategy, or if that's what the professionals you're working with are teaching you, then your child is bound to feel like they are incapable of managing their emotions. So they stuff it, or they throw it on you. It's your fault. And so you see this for older kids as like they're blaming. They blame their siblings, they blame their circumstances, they blame you as a parent. So if that's what's going on, guys, it's a clear disconnect between what you're doing to shift behavior and show and demonstrate love. And this happens because at some point your never-ending cup of love for your infant, right, gets to hit a bottom because you're freaking tired. You're tired. Especially if you're a highly sensitive parent yourself. You're a parent who's highly sensitive. And if you and your spouse disagree in a 2-parent household, then your cup is even shorter. So what happens? Maybe at 4, you can love your kid enough to know that you've got them. But at 5, you're starting to think, wait a minute, we're beyond meltdown stage. Now the pediatrician is saying he'll grow out of it, but developmentally, everything I find on Google says meltdowns should be stopping by now. So what are you talking about, doc? And then 6 comes around and your kid's starting to know the difference between right and wrong. And you're like, they got to get to school. This is first grade stuff right now. And what's going on here? How do I help my kid get in school? And okay, well, at least they're not doing it at school. So that's good. Let me talk back to the, professionals I've talked with. Oh, okay. He'll grow out of it. You're sure? Okay. All right. So let's just keep going. So guys, here's the deal. You have the unique opportunity to know how your future is going to play out and make a decision if you're done dealing with that. Because regardless of being highly sensitive, if you view yourself to be a burden to your family, if you view yourself to not be capable of managing your emotions, and you don't feel skilled in being able to do that, then you're going to emotionally avoid in 3 different ways. 1, blaming other people and becoming a victim and kind of falling into codependent relationships, which look a lot like, at best, people-pleasing workaholics. At worst, people who become victims to emotionally abusive relationships. And And again, guys, this is not just blunt observation. I'm not trying to judge people here. Okay, you're a parent who wants to stop this behavior, so you need to know how this plays out. All right. So many, and it's fair to say that many of you who have may have histories of childhood emotional neglect, or worse than that, and so you're even more doubly engaged in preventing this cycle for your kid. Emotional avoidance, the avoidance of an emotion, stems from the inability to feel comfortable in your own emotion. And if you're not comfortable in your own emotion, then you think that your emotions are because of what happens to you instead of what's happening in you. And when you think that, then you look for ways to make sense of it by putting yourself in position to turn off your gut, or you never develop a gut. So, and we're just going to look at this straight up clinical, guys. So roll with me here, that there's no judgment. I'm just trying to be analytical. People who engage, who find themselves in relationships where they may be taken advantage of, part of them is disconnected to their intuition, their gut. And this is super important, parenting a highly sensitive kid, because if your child does not feel capable of managing their emotions, then they do not feel capable of trusting their gut. Those two things are very, very related. Because if you can trust your gut, then you can feel in control of yourself. And if you can feel in control of yourself, then you can feel in control of your emotions. You can trust your decisions to solve your own problems. They're all related. Type in the chat if you're following my if you're following my logic here. Jill asked, is highly sensitive child, being a highly sensitive child, and being BPD directly correlated? So, it looks like I might get spotty, guys. Hopefully my internet's doing okay. Jill, in my 10 years of experience, and my head clinician, Autumn, she also helps me coach in the coaching business. She also has 10 years of experience in this and is very, very trained in working with BPD. People on my team, we've never seen a non-highly sensitive person develop BPD. I'm not going to say that there aren't random ass anomalies, but the development of borderline personality disorder requires three things: biological component, a social aspect, and an invalidating environment. It's called the biosocial theory. I talk a little bit about that in the diagnosis video. I think I did that last year, so I'm not expecting you to remember that. But if you want to learn more about that, type in diagnosis and personality in the search button of this group, and you'll watch that video too. I go into more about linehan stuff on BPD and why I was able to put two and two together. Being highly sensitive does not mean you will develop BPD, but being highly sensitive, growing up in an invalidating environment, means your odds of developing BPD are much, much higher than not developing it, and much, much higher than the population who's not highly sensitive. Okay, so correlation, not causation. So where was I going with this? Sorry, guys, I lost my train of thought. I've been speaking for a while too. Not being able to trust your gut, and then so if your kid can't trust their gut, then they can't make safe decisions. And if they can't make safe decisions, then they make risky choices. If they make risky choices, then they put themselves into dangerous positions. They put themselves into dangerous positions, then they make choices that impact their lives for the long run. And, like I said, at best, being a people-pleasing workaholic, you're not trusting your gut that says enough is enough, boss, or enough is enough, teammate, right? So there's a relationship there. And we teach that to when I work with my clients in terms of how to turn that around, to help your child develop their gut sense of trusting their own emotional experience and helping you be the guide of that, because the research demonstrates that you as the parent are the most effective teacher. And in my brain, in my experience, the only teacher that your child will benefit from in terms of learning how to build their own emotional sense of safety. That's what intuition is. It's not just danger, fight or flight. I mean, if your kid's in fight or flight, having meltdowns all the time, that's what that is, then it means that their intuition is off, like off the charts, because they're telling themselves, their body's telling themselves, like, I'm about to die right now. Is that true? No. Okay. So your kid's intuition is off kilter if they're having meltdowns on a regular basis. And you can't fix that by like telling them everything's going to be okay, reassuring. We've talked about this before. Or even teaching them what to do differently, because it's at a deeper level, guys. So I think I'm going to wrap it up. Go back and watch the whole thing, guys, and watch this again and again when you feel like you can put off changing how your child expresses their emotions. If that's not your top priority, parenting your kid, especially a kid who's highly sensitive, it's not at the forefront, then something in life will make it the forefront. I can't tell you what that is, but I can tell you that, after learning of my cousin's death, the only thing that keeps people from taking their own lives is knowing that they're capable of solving their own problems. So you have to lead first. Are you willing to bet on yourself so that you can teach your kid to bet on themselves? I can't make that decision for you. You have to make that decision for yourself. And if you're ready to make that decision, then get on the phone. We'll turn this around. All right, guys, that's it. I opened up my spots for May. So you have the opportunity to book a call with me next month. And of course, just keep checking, get on the list for an earlier call if things open up. And like I said, I'm still trying to figure out how to grieve and do what I'm meant to do on this earth. So my schedule's a little wonky right now. So some patience and grace is appreciated. And we'll work it out for your family. We can figure this out, and you can take back the control of your household in a way that feels like you are doing the exact thing that you need to do to support your child to feel like they can control themselves. So it doesn't feel like a big old question mark anymore. You deserve that freedom. So does your kid. Good night.